Hi, my name is Akshay Dare, and this is Huw Meads, a TM teacher who's been meditating for over 40 years. So, Huw, would you like to share your experiences with TM and how you started?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. I was just 18 years old when I learned to meditate. And the reason I learned was I just had this feeling there was more to life than met the eye. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I went out looking. And all those years ago, there was no Google. So your search engine was the local library. So I just used to go from time to time and browse around the philosophy and psychology sections. And eventually, after looking at all kinds of things, I got the idea that whatever it was I was looking for, meditation was the way to get to it. And I tried to learn to meditate out of a book, and that didn't really produce any results. And
Yeah.
then one day I came across a book on transcendental meditation. And the book didn't particularly impress me, but it was just convenient in that there was a local centre in Birmingham that taught TM. So I thought, well, these people can teach me to meditate properly, so let's give it a go.
You-
And the effect was it really changed my outlook on life, because up to that point, or that stage in my life, I had quite a negative view. I, sort of thinking, what's the point of anything? And it really changed my whole experience of life. So there was a time when I'd been meditating about 6 months or so. And on that one occasion, my mother happened to give me a lift across to the TM centre. And she stopped and had a chat with the local teacher. And he said to her, "Have you noticed any difference in Hugh since he's been doing this meditation?" And she said, "Oh, yes, he's much brighter." And I don't think she meant that I was more intelligent than I already was, but just that, I cheered up and my outlook on life was much brighter.
I think that was the same for me, Huw, because once you taught me TM about a year ago, I had this negative perception on life. I just kind of had the view that I just didn't like myself that much. And the other people's opinions affected me so much that it just kind of, caved in on me and just changed my output on myself. But once you dive in with TM, and I've had mindfulness experiences, but I just the negative perception's still there. But when you could dive in with TM and you reach that subconscious mind and go down into those unconscious level, you basically, you just get rid of all that negativity within you, and you end up being a more happier person every time you dissolve that negative stress.
Yeah, that's a lovely experience to hear. Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit about the brain benefits of TM and how has it like benefited people in a way, like how TM changes the brain, or does it change the brain, or the EEG coherence in a way?
Yeah. So there's been some very interesting research, and as time has gone on, the kind of research they can do is very sophisticated. So, for example, one thing they found in research, and when I say research, I talk about research that has been peer reviewed and published in academic, scientific, or medical journals. So one interesting finding was they found that during the practice of transcendental meditation, blood flow actually increases to the brain. So that was a very interesting finding. And another interesting finding is that, as most people will probably be aware, there are two hemispheres to the brain, the left and the right hemisphere. And they each have their different functions. So the left side is to do with logic. So if you were doing trying to solve a mathematical problem, you'd be using the left side of your brain. But if you're trying to do something creative, write a song or a painting, you'd be using the right side of your brain. And normally each side of the brain is operating completely independently of the other half. There's no synchronization between the two. And what they observed through the technology of using electroencephalograph to measure the brain's activity, what they found was that the two halves of the brain were beginning to link up. And the technical term for that is brainwave coherence. So the brain was starting to function more coherently. And interestingly, they did a research study on people who are long-term meditators, long-term defined as they've been doing TM for 6 months or more, and people who had recently learned within the last 2 weeks. And interestingly, the level of brainwave coherence was about the same between both groups. So that shows that the practice of TM, even if you're just starting it, it produces that level of brainwave coherence almost straight away. And then interestingly, they did the measure of the EEG levels outside of meditation. And what they found there was the long-term meditators had much more coherent brainwave patterns outside of meditation. And what's significant about that is that it's a very practical thing. So it's not just that your brain's functioning more coherently when you're meditating, but it's functioning more coherently in your day-to-day activity, which is the important thing, because that means you can get the benefits, the advantages of that. And in the research on TM, they found that things like memory improves, both short-term and long-term memory. Concentration improves, even though the technique doesn't involve any concentration. In research on students, they found that learning ability increases and grade scores increase. And in general terms, it's been found that things like creativity increases, problem-solving ability increases. And overall, the effect is that it's as though you somehow acquired a very efficient personal assistant who brings things to your attention at the time you need to think about them. So you might have, say, any one time, 5 or 10 things you need to deal with. And rather than churning things over and over in your mind, what happens is you think that those things come to mind at the time you need to deal with them, and you're not kind of bothered by them at other times.
And I feel like when I do TM, when I'm doing my work, I think I can consolidate things with this deep awareness that I sense when I do TM after doing some work, like with my educational stuff. Is that what Maharishi talked about, this deep awareness in a way that can help you consolidate more information?
Yes. It's as though if you think of the brain as well, I mean, one statistic that people are probably familiar with is that the average person only uses about 5 to 10% of their mental potential. In fact, Einstein reckoned he was only using 5 to 10%, which doesn't say a lot for the rest of us. So what's happening is you're using more of that capacity, that potential that your mind has.
And the different brain waves that come with TM, it's alpha waves. Could you describe what alpha waves is? Alertness, is it?
It's correlated with a state of what's called restful alertness. So, okay. And just to sort of give you a handle on that. So what happens during the practice of TM, what they found in the research is that not just the mind, but the body also goes to a very deep state of rest. So things like your heart rate drops right down, your breath rate drops right down. So your whole mind-body system is going to a very deep level of rest. But at the same time, you're awake and alert. And that's quite a unique thing, because if you think about normally when we're deeply rested, we're in deep sleep, we're unconscious with no idea what's happening. And normally when we're awake, the body is active, the heart rate is, I think, something like 70, 75 beats a minute. So what you've got is a state of being very deeply rested in mind and body, but being awake and alert at the same time. And you don't get that combination with any other everyday experience, when we're in normal everyday activity. So that pattern for the mind's functioning is correlated with an increase of alpha waves in the brain.
Yeah. What is this? I've heard the states of consciousness. There's waking, sleeping, dreaming, and then there's 3-4 the levels of consciousness that we happen to TM when we do TM. And if we get to those states of consciousness, we experience deeper levels of bliss, intelligence, and creativity. Could you go into those, please?
Okay, so as you say, there's the 3 ordinary levels we all experience: waking, sleeping, and dreaming. Now, in the practice of transcendental meditation, what happens is a person is able to, first of all, go beyond to transcend the conscious level of thinking. And then the mind goes to deeper and deeper levels gradually. And then when one gets to the deepest level, we refer to that as pure awareness or pure consciousness. So at that level, the mind is completely silent. There's no activity. The mind is simply experiencing itself in its pure nature, hence the term pure awareness or pure consciousness. So when we experience that, we could say it's a 4th state of consciousness. And also there's a corresponding state of the physiology. So in that state of pure consciousness, your metabolic rate is at its lowest possible level for someone who's still alive. So it's not there's no activity, but it's minimal activity for both the body and the mind. So that's a 4th state of consciousness. So we can experience that when we're doing transcendental meditation. And what happens over time is that through alternating 20 minutes of meditation twice a day with just ordinary everyday activity, what happens is that state of pure awareness is not just there when we meditate. Gradually, slowly over time, it begins to be integrated into our everyday experience. So that after some time, what happens is that pure awareness is experienced at the same time as you're awake and active. It's experienced at the same time as you're sleeping. It's experienced at the same time as you're dreaming. And that might sound a bit strange. You know, how can you experience two states of consciousness at the same time? But that is what happens. And it's actually a very blissful state. And first of all, what one experiences is that this merging of the two states of consciousness, or having two states of consciousness at the same time, first of all, it's an experience that comes and goes. So a person might experience it for, say, 10 minutes one day, and then it goes away, and then a week later it experiences it for 15 minutes. So it's a gradual thing. It comes and it goes until eventually it becomes permanent. Eventually that state of pure awareness is so integrated in your mind-body system that it's there throughout the whole cycle of 24 hours of waking, sleeping, and dreaming. So when that level of pure awareness is there alongside the three ordinary states of consciousness, we describe that as a fifth state of consciousness. So we call that cosmic consciousness. So that's the fifth state of consciousness. And it's been called different things in different traditions. In the Buddhist tradition, they call it nirvana. In other traditions, they refer to it as the state of enlightenment. So this is nothing new. This is something that human beings have been experiencing for thousands of years. And what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi has done, as well as bringing the knowledge of how to practice transcendental meditation out into the world, he's also given us this knowledge of higher states of consciousness. So cosmic consciousness is a higher state of consciousness, but actually it's only the first of the three higher states. So after some time of being in cosmic consciousness, with the application of some advanced meditation techniques, a person can then get to the next level, which Maharishi refers to as God consciousness. And what he means by that is a person starts to experience subtler levels of reality. So someone starts to experience, for example, the celestial level. And that might sound a bit airy-fairy to some people, but it is an experience that even people who've never meditated have had that experience. And a famous example in our culture is the poet William Wordsworth, who wrote a poem called Intimations of Immortality. And in the poem, he's describing experiences that he had as a child, but just spontaneously, because even before that experience becomes a permanent experience, someone can just spontaneously, someone who's never meditated could just spontaneously have that experience. It just happens. And at the start of the poem, he says, "There was a time when meadow, grove, stream, the earth, and every common sight did seem to me apparelled in celestial light." So he's still seeing everything that's there on the surface level of life, the fields, the stream, and so on, but he's also perceiving at the same time that very subtle level of reality that we don't normally experience, that experience of celestial light. And then after a person has been in God consciousness for some time, what develops is the highest level of consciousness, which Maharishi refers to as unity consciousness. So this is where a person still perceives, everyday reality, still experiences, a car as a car and a house as a house, and you still see all those things the same as anybody does. But what dominates your perception is the underlying level of unity of life. So what Maharishi says is there's this level of life at which everyone and everything is connected. And he uses the parallel example of what physicists call the unified field. So in physics, there is this idea that there's underlying unity to everything in life. And so Maharishi says that that applies to all existence. There is that level of unity at which everyone and everything is connected.
And is this, and as you go higher levels of consciousness, you experience more intelligence, more bliss, am I right?
Absolutely, yes. So in unity consciousness, somebody's experience of life would be bliss 24 hours a day.
And did anyone reach unity consciousness in our history, except Maharishi? Has anyone reached that level of consciousness, unity?
Well, there is an example in the 20th century, a gentleman called Krishnamurti. He's an Indian gentleman. And he's an example, a very, very rare example of someone who just spontaneously has that experience. So it's clear if you read Krishnamurti's writings and some of his things he said in conferences and talks that he's given, it's clear that his perception is he's experiencing life at that level of underlying unity. And throughout history, there have been examples, great sages, great saints who've had that experience. So it is something that is recorded. People's experience over decades, centuries, thousands of years. People have had that experience.
And what's the difference between a yogi, a saint, and someone that's a yogi and mystic? Sorry, a yogi and a mystic. What's the difference? Because they look very similar, but I always had this idea of them, and if you could explain the difference between them.
Yeah. So a yogi is someone who is engaged in spiritual practices to produce the experience of enlightenment. So a yogi isn't necessarily someone who is enlightened, but is someone who is practicing techniques such as transcendental meditation to gain that level of enlightenment. So that's, if you like, what's sometimes called an aspirant, someone who's on the path to enlightenment but hasn't reached the goal yet. So mystic. Now Maharishi said that actually he didn't like the term mysticism, because he says mysticism means that there's something you don't understand. So mysticism is something that a phrase or expression that's used by people who haven't had the experience of enlightenment to describe people who have, because in a sense, if you're not enlightened, it's very difficult to understand what it's like. So that's why that term mystic or mystical has been applied. And the word saint means different things in different cultures. So in sort of Western Christian culture and the religions of the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, a saint is in the Catholic tradition, it's someone who's performed a number of miracles. In other parts of Christian tradition, it would be someone who just lives is a very holy person. But in the Indian tradition that Maharishi comes from, it has a very specific meaning, which is someone who has achieved that level of enlightenment.
And like the cities, like I don't know if you read in the cities, for example, like you can walk on water, or your body starts moving up a bit. I don't know if you heard of that before, like advanced, very, 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 very advanced people that have practiced the advanced, meditations and stuff.
Yeah, so there are advanced techniques. So Maharishi taught, as well as the basic transcendental meditation technique, he taught advanced techniques, which are referred to as siddhis. So the word siddhi means perfection. So it's about perfecting certain techniques. So in very advanced stages. So I suppose one way you could have referred to Jesus was that he was a siddha. He had that mastery over the laws of nature, that he could walk on water. One of the siddhi techniques is the technique that Maharishi refers to as yogic flying. So what happens is that the body spontaneously lifts off the ground with no physical effort, no physical movement of a muscle, just spontaneously using that technique. The body lifts off the ground and then it goes down again. And when we do the yogic flying technique, we do it on foam mattresses, because it would be quite uncomfortable, and you probably damage your back if you were doing it on a hard floor. So you have to do it on a mattress, so you literally get a soft landing. So these are techniques that have been the preserve of people in caves and in remote places in the Himalayas. And what Maharishi did is bring that knowledge out to the world at large. And
people that have claimed to have intuition, how would TM benefit their intuition, and what is intuition?
Okay, so intuition. So one way you could think of that is in terms of cognition. So if I'm walking down the road and I see my friend walking towards me, when he gets near enough that I can recognize my friend, I think, oh, that's Jimmy. So the point where I realize that's Jimmy, he's my friend, that's cognition. I've cognized that this person walking towards me is someone I know and someone I'm friendly with. That's cognition. And intuition, in a sense, you could describe as precognition. So if you run that scenario again, but this time, 10 minutes before I meet Jimmy as I'm walking down the street, I have this idea, I'm going to see Jimmy today. I haven't arranged to see him. I haven't arranged to meet up, but I just know I'm going to see Jimmy today. And then I walk down the street and 10 minutes later, there he is. So that would be precognition. And that, in a sense, is what intuition is. It's literally would be teaching from inside. So you know something. So not that you know something in the ordinary way, like if I've, rung Jimmy up and arranged to meet him at a certain place at a certain time, then I'd know, from making that arrangement, I'd know that I was going to meet him. So this is something that there's no, if you like, external evidence that I'm going to meet him, but I just know, I just have this feeling. One way it's described, the psychologist Carl Jung coined the term synchronicity. So an example of that would be, you're thinking, oh, I haven't seen my friend Jimmy for a long time, and then 5 minutes later he phones you up. So it's almost like there's some level at which you know something without knowing it in a rational way, if you like. So intuition is that kind of precognition. You get a feeling something's about to happen. I find it happens quite a lot to me. I'm thinking about something, and then there'll be an item about that on on the news, you know, 10 minutes later, or the next day, or later on that day. So in someone who is practicing transcendental meditation, and particularly if they're practicing the advanced techniques, that intuition becomes highly developed.
Is it because it's because I've read in this Bamisha Kaku, he said about the frontal lobes, like the frontal lobes are the executive part where we make decisions and plan things. And when we plan things, we're able to see the future because that's what the frontal lobes are for, to see the future. And as we meditate, this abstract knowledge of like seeing the future really grows, in my opinion, with the TM I've experienced.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the mechanics of that would be, but the explanation from the point of view of the unified field is that, as I said, there's that level at which everything and everyone is connected. So the more your awareness is able to operate from the level of the unified field, the more enlightened a person is, or more progress they've made on the path to enlightenment, then the more likely it is that they're in touch with that level of underlying unity. And at that level of underlying unity, because everything and everyone is connected, then it's possible that things will come to your awareness just spontaneously.
And I've always heard this expression that mental health and having a mental health or having creativity is linked together. And sadness and sorrow is linked to having this kind of edge in the world. What's your advice to people that don't believe in meditation but would consider it? What's your advice to them, like?
Well, my advice would be learn to meditate.
But it's like this always expression with a tortured artist is the in the history books such as Pablo Picasso or John Nash, these people with highly creative people that have mental health problems, but people that like it's kind of a way of like saying like it's kind of seen in society that these people have high levels of creativity. Is that true? Is that you think it's kind of like a myth that some people?
Well, what I would say is you don't have to be tortured to be an artist. You know, many successful artists who don't have that level of torture. And I know this is, you know, like with Van Gogh and other great artists, there is that association. And I think probably where that idea of the tortured artist, I mean, another example would be Beethoven. You know, Beethoven was, you know, sometimes almost on the point of madness. So frustrated was he. And I think probably that notion of the tortured artist, I suspect it comes from, is that they have these times where they're highly creative. You know, Beethoven just cognizing this beautiful music, or Van Gogh doing his incredible paintings. And so they have these periods where they're like, you know, the modern expression we use is in the zone, or things just flowing. So the creativity flows through them. And I think where the torture comes in is that they can't control that. It comes and it goes. And when it goes, they feel that frustration that they want to create, but somehow the inspiration or the mechanics of it are not there, not available to them. So I think that's where the myth of the tortured artist comes by, these great creative people who didn't have a systematic technique to develop their creativity, but nevertheless, they were blessed with creativity that would come and that would go.
Because they could just have a bit of higher states of consciousness in a way, isn't it, Huw?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because as I say, it's possible that someone who's never meditated can just slip into high states of consciousness. And I think, you know, people like Wordsworth, D.H. Lawrence, you know, probably William Blake, many of our greatest writers and artists.
Even Ramanujan, he could like write mathematical formulas without even just like having the knowledge of mathematics in a way. And I think he could have had some higher states of consciousness in a way to play with it.
Yeah, and I think with Einstein, I think what happened was he cognized the special theory of relativity. He didn't sit down and work it all out in mathematical formulas. He cognized that that's how the laws of nature work, and then afterwards, then he did the maths to verify it. So I think these things. Another example would be Thomas Edison. You know, he was struggling he had this concept of creating the light bulb, and he just couldn't get that final stage, and he got frustrated. And he felt tired, and he had to lie down. And while he was lying down resting, in a sort of state of semi-consciousness, not quite awake and not fully asleep, the answer came to him. And that's where that expression we have in our culture, the light bulb moment, you know, he just had that sudden flash of inspiration.
I think every time I meditate, I get something new out of it. Like I get this amazing ideas or like a stream of thoughts. And I think I'm just churning out all that stress in my brain, and then the creativity and that consciousness is growing within me. And is creativity, would you say, is it, how would you describe creativity to someone that's never experienced it?
Good question. I mean, we think of, talk about artists and musicians and painters and music, and people who create those kind of works of art. We think of that as creativity, but actually, baking a cake can be creative. Finding new, combining spices when you're cooking a meal, that can be creative. So there's lots of ordinary everyday ways to be creative. It's not the preserve of great artists and musicians and so on. So it's just that ability to create something, whether it's a cake or a wonderful painting that in years to come sells for $100 million, or things like the works of Lennon and McCartney. I think in 200 years' time, people will still be listening to the songs of the Beatles. So, and how did they do it? The people who have the academic knowledge of music, they can analyze the Beatles' music and talk about the scales and the composition and all those technical aspects. But John Lennon and Paul McCartney didn't know any of that. They just did it spontaneously. And so it's just, I suppose in a way, it's creating something out of nothing. Or if you talk about, say, cooking as an example, you have the ingredients, and from those raw ingredients, fruit, vegetables, spices, cooking oil, you create something else. So creativity is manufacturing something out of nothing, or something out of some ingredients.
Yes. So going back to the history of TM, how did it all start off? I mean, there was Gurudev, but Maharishi was the one that brought it to the Western world. How did it start off, and this organization of TM?
Well, Maharishi studied with his spiritual master Gurudev for 12 years. He lived in the ashram and he wasn't the only one. There were other acolytes studying with Gurudev. And Gurudev passed away in 1953. And initially, Maharishi as a monk went to live in a part of the Himalayas. And he just lived a life of complete silence, other than just occasionally there was another saint who lived in the same valley who would come and just visit Maharishi. But even now they didn't have much conversation. They just sort of sat together in silence and occasionally exchanged a few words. And as Maharishi was just sitting there in silence, the name of a town in southern India would come to his mind, a town called Rameshwaram. And it kept coming to him. And eventually he said to his friend who used to come and sit with him, I keep hearing this, the name of this town keeps coming to mind. And it's thousands of miles away, the Himalayas up in the north of India. And this town is right down in the south. And so his friend said to him, pointing to the distance, to the area beyond the Himalayas, he said, beyond there, it's all mud. Which I think he meant both literally and symbolically, metaphorically. And so it went on. And, from time to time, his friend would come and Maharishi would say, I keep getting the name of this town coming into my head. And after a while, his friend said, well, if you keep having that thought, you should go there, go on a pilgrimage, because it's a very holy place down in southern India. So eventually Maharishi made the long trek from, I say trek, he probably caught the train for part of the journey, went to southern India and spent some time in Rameshwaram. And then he thought, well, while I'm down here, I'll visit some other holy sites, many holy sites in the south of India. And one particular town that he was staying in, he would go to the local temple every day, and then he walked back to the room that he was renting. And one day he's walking back from the temple and he noticed there's someone following him. And after a little while, he turned around and said, I noticed you following me. Is there a reason for that? And the man said, well, I noticed you're from the north, because presumably by the way he was dressed, this man could tell he was not a local person. And he realized Maharishi was a holy man. And he said, I run the local library and we have you do talks for the public. And I wondered if you would like to give some talks. So Maharishi said yes. And by this time they got back to the room Maharishi was staying. And the librarian said, well, can you write down titles for me? I'd like to give a talk every night for a week. So Maharishi wrote down 7 titles, gave it to the man. And the man was about to go. Maharishi said, okay, I need to copy those down so I know what I'm going to talk about. So Maharishi did this series of talks, and every night there were more people there. It spread by word of mouth. And so at the end of that week, Maharishi decided, well, I should teach these people to meditate. So he just did. And then he went to the next town and he taught some people to meditate there. And he just spontaneously, just like that, just started like that. And so he went around India, spent 3 years just doing that, going around India teaching, taught an awful lot of people. And 1958, there was a big meeting to celebrate a birthday of Gurudev. And many people there, I think well over 1,000 or so. And on the last night of the sort of conference, Maharishi was giving the closing speech and talking about what he'd experienced from teaching people to meditate. And he said, with this knowledge, we could spiritually regenerate the whole world. And there's rapturous applause that went on and on and on for about 15 minutes. And so while it was going on, Maharishi went to the people at the back of the marquee who had organised the whole thing, and he said, "Can we keep all the marquee and everything for another day?" And they said, "Yes, whatever you want. Just go ahead and say to do whatever you want to do." So Maharishi went back to the microphone. And he said, "Well, tomorrow night we'll meet here again, and we'll inaugurate the spiritual regeneration movement." And that was sort of the official beginning. And then Maharishi started to travel around the world, went to, first of all, to Burma, or Myanmar as we now call it, through the other countries of Southeast Asia, to Hawaii, and then on to California, and then on to Britain, came here in December of 1959 for the first time. And cutting a long story short, then went around the world 7 times over the next 10 years. And the whole thing just grew spontaneously.
And how did the Beatles come into play with the expansion of the TM movement?
So what happened was that Patty Boyd, or Patty Harrison as she was at the time, had learned transcendental meditation. And she thought it was great. And actually, she is still, for the record, she's still meditating. A friend of mine who ran a TM centre in London, Patty used to come to his meetings. So Patty's remained a very keen meditator over all these years. And she heard that Maharishi was coming back round to London again on one of his world tours, and he was giving a talk at the Hilton Hotel in August 1967. And she persuaded George to come to the meeting. And George had already got a sort of developed an interest in Indian things. He'd met Ravi Shankar and was learning to play the sitar. So he had sort of had an interest in things Indian. And so he was keen to come. And in those days, when one of them did something, they all did it together. So John, Paul and Ringo all went to that talk at the Hilton Hotel. And at the end of it, they sent a message, could they have a meeting with Maharishi after the talk? And the rest is history. So they learned to meditate. And the next year, 1968, they went to Rishikesh and spent some time in India with Maharishi. And they're still very keen to this day. So when the David Lynch Foundation, a charity that teaches TM, was launched, I think it's probably about 10 years or so ago now, there was a big press conference. And at that press conference, speaking and presenting to the press were Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, George Harrison's widow Olivia, and John Lennon's widow Yoko. So all of them are very supportive still of TM.
And I think TM is just a great thing. I mean, Maharishi offered the world this beautiful technique that helps you to find peace, find great tranquility, Can you share some wisdom from Gurudev, please, Huw?
Yes, I mean, what to pick out? Maharishi said, Gurudev said that basically the aim of life is to achieve unity consciousness, and he expressed that in the way the expression he used at that time was in terms of finding God. And he said, that a person, because Gurudev believed in reincarnation, he said a person goes through many lifetimes, and there comes a point, having experienced life at lots of different levels, that a person gets a human body. And he said this is a great opportunity. And he said, if after getting a human body, if you don't find God, you have sold a diamond for the price of spinach. So that was Gurudev's ultimate wisdom, that our purpose in this life is to become enlightened, to achieve that level of unity with God. That's
beautiful, Huw. I mean, it's just great wisdom in a way. How would you explain the TM consciousness-based education that many countries are offering, that David Lynch has offered, and why they don't do in the UK? What's your opinion on consciousness-based education, in opinion?
Well, it's a great thing, and we have an example in this country, the Maharishi School in Skelmersdale in Lancashire. And how it works is that the children all do the national curriculum, same as any other school. They do maths and English and science and art and everything that any school would do. And the difference is that twice a day they perform transcendental meditation together. So at the start of the school day and the end of the school day, they meditate together. And while you normally just meditate twice a day, one exception to that is when they do an exam, they sit down and they all meditate together, the teacher and the pupils, for about 10 minutes before they start the exam, which is quite a novel concept. Yeah, sit there in silence for 10 minutes before the exam. And one other aspect to it is that they relate everything they learn to the whole picture, if you like. So, normally when you're doing a physics lesson, you just learn whatever it is you're doing in that particular lesson, maybe quantum theory or laws of motion or whatever it is. And then at the end of the lesson, the last thing they do is relate that to the whole picture, how the thing they've learned, how that relates to the whole of life.
And I think TM should be taught in every single school, not just, because as going back from, you're a media teacher, how do you think it's like to be a media teacher? Is this a lot of stress and it can be?
Well, there's a lot of stress in any kind of teaching. It's a very challenging job.
Mm-hmm.
There's some advantages, I think, in being a media teacher because all students are familiar with the media. They all use it. So it's a bit more of a user-friendly subject than some maybe that's a bit more abstract. So in any teaching job, there are challenges, and the advantage of being a TM meditator is it enables you to meet those challenges more successfully. So you're not, so compared to say a teacher who doesn't meditate, you're starting with a much lower stress level, because if you're a bit stressed to start with, and then you've got the stress that can happen in a teaching day on top of that, obviously you're up in the ante in terms of your stress levels. But if you start from a calm level, then any stress you experience, it goes on to that level of calmness rather than a level of existing stress.
I think that's a good point here, because like teachers, when they do practice TM, they become mentors rather than actual teachers in a way, isn't it? Like,
yes.
Yeah. I think like with TM, I practiced TM for about a year, and like it was due to a lot of reasons. And like, what do you think man's search of happiness is? Because man's search of happiness, it can be money in today's society, it can be expensive things, it can be women, or it could be, how do you think man's search of happiness should be in today's society, in this world of like plethora of just so much things that are happening?
It's a good question. It's a bit like if you imagine someone searching for gold, and they look all over the place for gold. They're looking on the surface all over the gold, and they're walking around. So they brought this land, and they're searching everywhere on this land to find some gold, and they don't find it. And eventually they give up and sell the land. And then somebody else buys the land and starts to dig, and they find gold just below the surface. And in that analogy, that search for happiness is like the person just walking around on the surface. And there's nothing wrong in having goals and things you want to achieve in life, whether that's to run a successful business or have a happy family life or whatever that person's goal is. And in fact, Maharishi said it is the nature of life to want more and more, because that search for fulfillment is a natural, innate factor in how a human being's life is, how the mind is wired. It's a natural tendency to search for more in life. And unfortunately, if people don't realize that the key to happiness is within, they can go searching for all kinds of things. They want to become a millionaire, and so they become a millionaire, and they want to become a multi-millionaire. And so they go on and on and on. And they keep going for more and more. But really, they need to dig within and find the gold within.
And this is the 200% of life that Maharishi was talking about, wasn't it? Like you find 100% in this world and 100% within to get the 200% of life in general, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And would you say that, why do you think monks give up materialism? Because if they get in not the 100% of life from the outside, but are they getting, say, 300% of the life from the inside? Because they're getting deeper levels of consciousness?
It's just a specific path. So in broad terms, there are two kinds of people in the world. There's people like you and I, who are householders. We have responsibilities of family life and earning money and all of those kinds of things. And that's one choice. And then there's a very small percentage of people who decide just their whole life is just going to be devoted to spiritual development. And it's not that either one is better than the other. It's not that one path is a quicker route or a better route to enlightenment and fulfillment. They're just different. And so someone who chooses a monk's way of life or a recluse way of life, it's just a choice. And because they've chosen to focus totally on spiritual development, they don't need the material things of life. They don't feel any need to drive a Ferrari or even a Ford Focus. They're just kind of in a way self-sufficient. So, I mean, obviously they have the basic needs. They need to eat and sleep and so on. But they don't have any needs beyond the very basic needs of life.
And does that sense of having less, like, that have you read, I mean, in Zen, they said less is more, right? So is that why, would that be similar to the TM type of the Peruvian pundits, in a way, that have this notion of having less, but having the 100% within more?
Yeah, one way Maharishi expressed it is that it's a bit like if you have a house and you have a garden, you enjoy the house and you enjoy the garden. And if you have a house but you don't have the garden, you enjoy the house and just don't mind the fact that you haven't got a garden. So it's nice to have comforts. It's nice to have nice things, a nice car to drive or whatever it is. I think the way Maharishi expressed it is don't strain after your needs of life. That if you meditate and just meditate and have some profession, some job to do, and just enjoy life. So you don't need to strain after your needs of life. You take care of the inner life, and then the other things of life come more naturally.
And I feel like with TM, I feel like my mind become a lot more balanced. I can think clearly. I have clarity I never had before. And do you think leaders need to do TM, or because when I see them on interviews, they look very tired, they just look stressed out? And what would be advice to world leaders and that are in stress crisis zones, and how would TM benefit them in a way?
They would certainly benefit from meditating individually, because it is very stressful when you take on, being a president or a prime minister of a country. The weight of the world is very much on your shoulders, and you're always under pressure. And you can't switch off. You hear about, some crisis happens and the prime minister's on holiday, and there's a question of is he or she going to come back from holiday and deal with the situation. So that there's no switch off. 24/7, 365 days a year, you're on duty effectively. So it is pressure. It's not surprising they look tired and stressed. So they would all certainly benefit from meditating individually. And even better than that, if they made TM available in the education system, throughout the whole of society, and got even just a small proportion, even just 1% of the population meditating, that would ease the overall collective level of stress of the country.
Another thing Huw I'd like to point out, has TM been taught in the prisons? Because has it been taught in prisons, and how has it affected them in the reports?
Yeah. Lots of interesting things. In America, in the 70s, there were some famous examples. One was Folsom Prison, a kind of legendary prison, because Johnny Cash recorded a concert there. And there's actually a book about it. It's called Inside Folsom Prison, about the experience of teaching TM there. And a more recent example was Bob Roth, who's an American TM teacher. He'd been teaching in prisons in America, and he went into the prison one day where he taught a group of prisoners, and he was doing one of the follow-up sessions. And so he did the session, and at the end of it, the prison guard came up to him, because of course there's always a prison guard in the room, no matter what's happening. And the prison guard said to him, "That was absolutely amazing." And Bob Roth thought the guy was just going to take the mickey, and the guy said, I just never seen anything like that before. And Bob Roth said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, for the guys that you had in this room to sit there with their eyes closed for any period of time is absolutely amazing, because normally they would not close their eyes with those other people around them, because they'd be too worried about they were going to get a knife in the back."
I think another thing is about TM, it's so easy to do. It's so simple. But I think Thich Nhat Hanh went to I think he went to prison, but I think because it's on the surface level, it would take a lot more time to train the brain to be calm. But TM, I mean, I've done the first time when I had that meeting with you in Birmingham, I just felt like a lightning bolt just hit my brain. It's kind of like that experience of bliss and everything just came together. It was just amazing. I mean,
Yeah, and we are teaching TM in prisons in the UK. There's a few prisons now where it's being taught. The work is being done by the David Lynch Foundation. So it is slowly happening, and when it, eventually it'll catch on, and fingers crossed, it'll be taught in all the prisons in the country.
and this TM, this EEG coherence, it increases your intelligence, like the IQ. Is it because both hemispheres are balanced in the way, and this balance is causing the IQ to increase?
It may not just be that. I mean, that may be a factor in it, but I think it's probably a combination of factors. So certainly the level of brainwave coherence increases, but I think it has a holistic effect.
Yeah, thank you. And final question here before we wrap up. What's the meaning of life in terms of Maharishi?
Well, what he would say, coming back to the Beatles, back in the 90s, Paul McCartney paid Maharishi a visit, took his children along. And it was the first time he'd seen Maharishi since 1968. And Maharishi gave them a book, his children each a book. I mean, when I say children, they were grown up, they're in their 20s or 30s. And he just wrote one word inside each copy of the book, and the word was enjoy. And Paul McCartney said, that's great, because that's what he said to us all those years ago in Rishikesh in 1968. And so in one word, it would be enjoy. And how you enjoy life is meditate and be active. So it's that interaction of just meditating for a short period, 20 minutes twice a day, morning and evening, and just engaging in life without straining on the needs of life. So just gradually infusing that pure awareness into your everyday experience of life, and life spontaneously becomes more enjoyable.
Thank you, Huw. This is my final output now. I think TM is a beautiful technique to practice to increase your awareness, your understanding, and your outlook on life, to increase your perception, to find a better outlook and understanding. Please practice TM, and I'll put the link in the description if you want to practice TM. Thank you so much. Bye.